Hello everyone, in case you're not aware, my name is Thibault. The title of my presentation is What an Untangled Web It Is, the academic weaving of a grad student for spinning out of control. We mentioned Shakespeare last time we were here, so I thought I'd roll with it. Okay, outward. So, Nancy Drew and weather instruments too. So I became interested in atmospheric science at a relatively young age. It all started in a little village in eastern Ohio called Bloomingdale. And there I was very interested in mystery stories growing up, and I still am. But I happened to come across one particular Nancy Drew story called The Mystery in Tornado Alley. I don't remember much about the book, except I think the villain's name was Derek, so in case you're reading it, spoiler. But it did include very good details about tornadic formation. And I went on to memorize those portions of the book that pertain to tornadoes, and ended up reading more about tornadoes and weather in general. And then, during a very cold day when ice covered everything and there was a bunch of snow, I constructed my very first weather instrument as a balloon barometer. And it was just a lot of fun to watch pressure changes and things like that. So that's how I got started, and good. And then, once I got to college, I happened to sort of accidentally take a class in the anthropology department about El Nino and the prehistory of environment and climate. And in this, we were studying the teleconnections between ENSO oscillations and various rise and falls of cultures throughout history, such as the Mayas, the Incas, the Egyptians. So it turned out there was a very strong correlation between different phases of El Nino and what was happening within cultures. We saw rises, demises, upheavals, government, political problems. So it was very interesting to look at those teleconnections. So the human factor really got me interested. All right, so once I got to graduate school, I found Dr. Montenegro had a very strong interest in not only climate modeling, but he also had a very well-developed, distinctive, he studied humans and migration throughout history, and prehistory. So the project that we chose in particular was Wallacea migration and climate modeling. So about 60,000 years ago, it was the Pleistocene, and sea levels were much lower then. So these shelves between Southeast Asian mainland and Australia were exposed. So it made the gap between the two continents much smaller. So the very first settlers of Australia would have had to pass through this gap, and they would have had to do so using some form of watercraft. So what we're trying to do is, we've got voyagers, we've got oceanic models. Why don't we use currents and data to try to predict which paths would have been most likely based on those oceanic characteristics? So we're just trying to find out what are the likely migration routes. So I really like this project because it was not only preserving my interest in climate, but it was also preserving my interest in the human connection, and doing so at a very interesting time depth. So, mis preguntas candentes at this time are, what paths will be favored by the models? There should be some that are favored, statistically speaking. How will the outputs of the model compare to previous projections? There has been previous work on the subject, but how will that measure up? What new archaeological sites will be indicated? Perhaps by modeling a specific route, we'll say, oh, archaeologists should go dig on this island because this is indicated as a likely area of migration. And then another possibility would, do these projections agree with the biogeographical distribution in the area? There's a possibility of network mapping because biological distributions don't always follow the oceanic currents. So the currents and the biology don't always match. So we'll see what that means in the future. And as one last thing, this is a fort in Ireland. I really wanted to use these pictures, and so I came up with a moral and a story. So, this is Charles Fort in Kinsale, Ireland, and I was there a couple of years ago for an archaeological dig outside of Dublin, and we took a trip down the coast. And this was Charles Fort, and it was constructed hundreds of years ago to protect this gap, and it protects the area going into Kinsale Harbor. The sad thing about this was that they built the fort, spent a ton of money. During the very first battle, the fort lost because the enemy came from the land and not the sea. So, the moral of the story is, when you're doing your research, always focus on what you're doing, but always consider the big picture. The end.